She was already inside the coop when I caught her bent over like she owned the place, whispering sweet nothings to my hens as if they belonged to her. Her hand moved slowly, reverently, lifting a warm egg from the nest box like it was some sacred relic. I didn't make a sound. I stood still, jaw locked tight behind the barn wall, eyes fixed on the scene playing out like a slow-motion betrayal. My neighbor, Karen. Yes, that Karen. The same one who banned wind chimes because the sound gave her dog anxiety, the one who chaired the HOA board like it was her personal throne and monitored lawn heights with military precision. And now here she was, on my land, stealing eggs like they were hers by divine right. How long had she been doing this? Why now? And more importantly, what the hell made her think she could? I know some of you watching this might wonder at what point does a neighbor become a trespasser, when she crosses the fence or when she crosses your sense of trust. I want you to think about that as we go deeper, because this isn't just about a stolen egg, it's about a stolen boundary and what it takes to get that line drawn back. Every morning on my land started the same. Coffee in hand, boots on, slow walk out past the tomato rows, nodding to Diablo, my rooster like clockwork. He strutted around like a puffed-up guard with feathers for armor and a temper sharpened by generations of barnyard breeding. My hens, 12 of them, laid like they had internal calendars. 12 eggs, every morning, like sunrises with shells. It was peace, order, the kind of rhythm you build your sanity around. Then it changed. Subtly, I started pulling 11 eggs instead of 12. No big deal. Hens can be moody sometimes, they just take a break. But the next week, I got 10, then 9. I adjusted feed, added crushed oyster shells for calcium, cleaned out the coop, tightened the wire. Nothing worked. The girls looked fine, healthy, feathers glossy. Diablo was calm but alert, his usual self. Still, the numbers didn't add up. You ever feel like your gut knows before your brain catches up, that quiet, internal shift that says something's wrong before you have any evidence? That's where I was, suspicion without proof. So I started watching carefully. I'd sit on the porch longer in the mornings, trail my eyes along the property line, look for movement that didn't belong. I wasn't paranoid, I was attentive. There's a difference. And then came the clue that made it real, a single footprint in the morning dew. Not an animal, not a boot, a running shoe, small, narrow, light pressure, fresh. The coop was set toward the back of my property, just shy of the cedar windbreak. To reach it, you'd have to walk the gravel path between the greenhouse and the fence unless you knew the shortcut. The footprint was right at the gate, a gate I always kept locked except, apparently, I hadn't. That morning, I also found a crumpled protein bar wrapper near the fence post. Vanilla almond, organic, pricey. Neither I nor my birds ate anything like that. I didn't say a word. I didn't confront anyone. I bought a padlock, a good one, and a trail camera, night vision, motion sensor, solar battery, mounted it low, almost hidden by the tall grass, angled directly at the coop door and nest box. Then I waited. 2 days passed, nothing. 3, still nothing. Then morning 4. My phone buzzed, camera alert. I opened the live view and there she was, Karen, bun pulled tight, wearing a matching pastel tracksuit like she was heading to yoga class. Yoga mat under one arm. She slipped through the side gate I had deliberately left unlocked, walked casually across the path. Diablo, mercifully locked up for his own safety that day, paced behind the mesh like a sentry behind bars. Karen stepped into the coop with the familiarity of a woman entering her own pantry. She crouched, opened the nest box, whispered something I couldn't hear. Then she smiled, and slid 4 eggs into a reusable egg carton like a smug little farmer's market queen. She waved at the hens as she left. She even glanced near the camera, unknowing, unbothered, as if she believed the world revolved around her version of what's acceptable. That moment did something to me. My blood went hot, but not loud. Cold fury, precise and silent. It wasn't just about eggs anymore. It was about how people like her use power in small towns through PTA meetings. HOA boards, Facebook groups with names like Better Living in Birchwood that mask control under the guise of order. I printed a screenshot, just one: Karen, mid-theft, egg in hand, coop in full view. That afternoon, I walked to her house. Her front lawn was perfectly trimmed, like it had been ironed. I rang the bell. She opened the door, smoothie in hand, wide-eyed with innocence. "Oh, hi, Joe," she said, as if nothing had happened. I handed her the print, didn't say a word. She looked down, blinked once, then smiled again, this time a little tighter. "Oh, come on, Joe," she said. "You've got so many. What's a few eggs? I thought we were neighbors." Neighbors. As if that word gave her license. As if shared geography meant shared property. As if her yoga mat and reusable tote entitled her to my damn hens. I asked if she thought that made it okay. She shrugged. "They're on the edge of HOA land anyway. Right? I figured you were sharing." Sharing? I walked away without another word. Not because I had nothing to say, but because what came next needed planning. Precision. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to report her. I was going to let her teach herself a lesson. And I had just the bird for the job. Where would you draw the line? When someone takes from you and laughs in your face, do you strike back? Or do you wait and build the kind of revenge that doesn't need noise? Just clarity. Because here's the truth about small towns and tight fences. Justice doesn't always come from a badge or a board meeting. Sometimes it comes from a rooster with attitude and a man who's had enough. And this was only the beginning. The next morning began with an eerie stillness. Not silence, because roosters and chickens are never truly quiet, but something in the texture of the air that felt different. I sipped my coffee slower than usual. Watching the sky brighten behind the sycamore line, Diablo let out his first crow from inside the coop, sharp and punctual as ever. But even that cry felt restrained. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was knowing what came next. Because after yesterday's conversation with Karen, if you could even call it a conversation, I knew I was dealing with more than a casual thief. She wasn't just stealing eggs. She was testing ownership, redefining territory. And she thought she had won. Not because she outsmarted me. No, she thought she had already claimed victory because she believed I wouldn't fight back. Because I was quiet. Because I minded my business. Because I didn't walk HOA meetings like a parade float. And maybe once upon a time, she'd have been right. But that ended the moment she laughed while holding something she'd stolen with both hands. So I spent the next 24 hours doing what every smart person does before war. I studied the battlefield. The first step was securing the evidence. I made backup copies of the footage, several, stored one in the cloud, one on a flash drive hidden inside a jar of nails, one on a physical hard drive locked in the barn. Karen had HOA connections, and I wasn't naive enough to think she wouldn't try to twist the narrative. But if she wanted to dance in the dirt, I was ready to lead. Then came the upgrade phase. I walked the perimeter of the coop with Diablo trailing behind me like a soldier waiting for orders. He cocked his head as I tested the tension on the chicken wire, ran my hand along the fencing, checked for weak points. I reinforced the gate, added gravel near the entrance to catch fresh footprints, and replaced the camera angle to capture a wider view. I wasn't just protecting birds. I was building a case. 2 days passed without incident. The hens laid their eggs as usual, 9, then 10, back to 11. I began to hope, foolishly, that maybe embarrassment had deterred her, that maybe my silent confrontation at her doorstep had been enough. But Karen wasn't the type to feel shame. She was the type to escalate. On the third morning, I found a pale blue envelope shoved halfway through the slats of my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a folded notice, an official HOA complaint, filed by Karen. Charges unsafe animal containment, excessive noise, and, most absurd of all, intentional neighbor intimidation through the use of livestock. I stared at it in disbelief. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was perfectly, painfully Karen. When caught red-handed, she didn't retreat. She attacked. She wanted the board to turn their eyes on me, to deflect attention, to shift the story. She didn't want to win the argument. She wanted to rewrite the script. That afternoon, I walked straight to the community center during open office hours. The woman at the front desk, Tasha, new to the board and not yet fully weathered by HOA politics, looked up and greeted me with a nervous smile. I handed her a sealed manila folder. Inside maps, GPS boundary confirmations, 3 still shots from the trail camera, and a list of noise recordings that proved Diablo's crowing never once exceeded county decibel limits. She didn't ask any questions, just nodded, thanked me, and promised to deliver it to the board before their next review session. As I turned to leave, she quietly said, "You're not the first." I paused. She looked me in the eye, voice barely above a whisper. "Karen's filed more complaints this year than the rest of the neighborhood combined. Most of them are ridiculous." I walked back home with something deeper than anger settling in my gut conviction. This wasn't about one woman with a boundary issue. This was about how someone like her would infect a place, control it, bend rules around her like garden wire. And for years, we'd all just let her, because it was easier to comply than to confront, because the petty wasn't worth the headache. Until one day it wasn't petty anymore. Until one day, it touched something that mattered. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I stepped outside, letting the screen door creak behind me. The moon hung low, yellow and bloated. My boots crunched quietly over gravel as I approached the coop. Diablo stirred from his perch but didn't crow. He blinked at me, feathers puffed with sleep, and then tucked his head back under his wing. I checked the locks. Everything secure. No movement, no noise. I turned back toward the porch, but something made me stop. A shadow, faint, brief, moving along the hedgerow near the east side of the property. I crouched instantly, slipping behind the rain barrel. No flashlight, just moonlight and patience. Then I saw it, just the faintest shift of fabric through the trees. A hood, a tote bag, a silhouette I'd come to recognize in daylight, but now tried to dissolve into the dark. She didn't go for the coop this time. She stood near the fence, watching, maybe testing for cameras, maybe trying to figure out my new routine. Then, as quietly as she came, she left, vanishing down the path that led behind her own garden beds, but she didn't notice the camera mounted higher now. Wide angle, infrared. She didn't see the new lens, but it saw her, clear as day. The next morning, 3 eggs were missing, no broken lock, no tripped sensor, just missing. She had figured something out, a weakness, a timing. Maybe a tool to open the gate without damaging it. And the message was clear. I'm still here. I'm not afraid. So I responded the only way I knew how, with strategy. I built a hidden chamber behind the largest nest box, a small compartment, just big enough for Diablo, lined it with straw, cut a latch door that I could trigger from the outside. Then I trained him. Took days. He was smart, fierce, but needed to associate the space with purpose, treats, commands, repetition. By day 5, he understood. When I tapped the side panel twice, he stayed hidden. When I opened the latch, he came out ready to challenge. It wasn't cruelty, it was theater. I wasn't trying to harm her, I was trying to wake her up. 3 mornings later, I got the alert. Camera pinged. She came earlier this time. No yoga mat, just the tote, a light step, confident. She opened the gate with ease, reached into the coop, crouched at the box, and just as her hand reached forward, I pulled the latch. The flap opened. Diablo exploded out. Wings flared like an avenging angel. Karen shrieked, dropped the carton, and fell backward into the dirt. Egg yolks smeared across her leggings. Feathers clung to her sweater. And the best part? The camera caught every second. No violence, just justice. She ran, didn't even look back. I watched from the barn window, not gloating, just satisfied. That evening, I received another HOA notice, this time claiming targeted harassment via trained animal. She accused me of assault with a rooster, but by then, the footage had already been shown to Walter, the HOA president, and Tasha, and 2 other board members. Quietly, calmly. They didn't laugh, they just nodded. They had seen enough. You see, sometimes truth doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it only needs to be shown, slow and undeniable. Karen thought she owned the narrative, that she could spin it. But when a rooster chases you out of a coop you have no right to be in. There's no version of that footage that makes you look like the victim. So what would you have done? Would you have fought her in court, posted everything online, called the news, or would you have waited, trained a bird, and let the land speak for itself? Because for me, it was never just about the eggs. It was about making it clear quietly, firmly, that some fences are not suggestions. And that behind every coop, there just might be a Dabla waiting. The morning after the ambush, everything felt sharper. The air, the light, even the crunch of gravel under my boots sounded more deliberate. Like the land itself had chosen sides. Diablo strutted near the coop with a pride that was almost human. Chest puffed, tail feathers spread like a war banner. The hens were calm, their clucks steady and rhythmic. No sign of stress, no signs of Karen. I had hoped that would be the end of it, that the message had landed loud enough without needing to raise my voice. But people like Karen don't retreat. They regroup. That afternoon, a teenager in a faded HOA volunteer polo shirt knocked on my door and handed me another envelope. This one was thick, printed on heavier stock, almost like a wedding invitation if weddings came wrapped in veiled threats. Inside was an official HOA incident report, not a complaint this time, but a summons. Karen had filed a formal claim alleging emotional distress, reckless endangerment via domestic livestock, and a stunning accusation that I had staged a deliberate psychological attack intended to humiliate. No mention of the eggs, not one word about trespassing, just her trauma and the rooster who had, according to her, lunged like a trained attack dog. I didn't laugh, not because it wasn't absurd, but because I knew the direction this was heading. Karen wasn't playing neighborly games anymore. She was building a narrative. And narratives, once they catch wind in places like this, have a way of warping into truth. I went straight to Walter. He'd been on the board longer than I'd lived on the street. Not a warm man, but a steady one. He met me at his workshop behind his house, the smell of sawdust hanging in the air like incense. I laid it all out, the footage, the timing, the complaint history. The updated GPS-zoned map of my property with highlighted footage timestamps overlaid. He didn't speak for a full minute. Then he let out a sigh that carried the weight of every HOA meeting he'd ever had to sit through with Karen. "I'll bring it to the board," he said, "but don't expect her to back down." That night, I added new floodlights around the coop and installed motion sensors along the tree line. Not out of fear, out of clarity. I needed to know exactly when she came back. Because she would, people like her don't quit. They mutate. The following evening, Diablo stood silently beside me on the porch as the wind shifted west, bringing with it the scent of honeysuckle and something else, expectation. I watched the shadows stretch across Karen's porch. Her lights stayed off. Her car didn't move, but I knew she was planning. The stillness was always the loudest part. 2 days later, the sheriff called, not a deputy. The sheriff himself. We had served in the same unit overseas before either of us ever thought about chicken coops and zoning lines. He asked if I had a minute. I said yes. He asked if I had footage. I said more than enough. He chuckled. Low and dry. "She's pushing hard." He said, "Says you orchestrated an animal attack. Wants to sue." I asked if she had any actual evidence. Only her word. He said, in a photo of her sweater with some feathers and yolk on it, but no bruises, no scratches, no medical record, nothing. He told me not to worry, but he also told me to be ready. She's not after the truth. She's after attention. So I prepared. I hired a lawyer, Dana, former agricultural law prosecutor. No nonsense. She reviewed the footage, the complaints, the zoning documentation. She said it was open and shut, legally speaking. But then she looked at me and said, "Don't underestimate crazy." 2 weeks later, we were in small claims court. Karen showed up wearing a neck brace. That was new. Her lawyer looked about 12 and couldn't meet my eye. The judge looked like he'd been dragged out of retirement and deeply regretted it. When my turn came, Donna handled everything. She presented the case like an accountant balancing a ledger. Every entry matched, every timestamp aligned. The footage showed Karen entering my property, unlatching the coop, stealing the eggs, and getting startled. No physical contact, no injury, no rooster assault, just karma. Karen's lawyer objected, said the video was manipulated and that I had created a hostile environment. The judge asked for proof. They had none. Then came the moment that ended it all. The judge took off his glasses, leaned forward, and said, "You walked into someone else's property. Ma'am, that rooster didn't chase you. He reacted to your presence inside a place you had no right to be." Then he paused. Case dismissed. Karen gasped, like someone had cut the air from her lungs. She started to protest, voice rising, but the judge raised a single hand and said, "Ma'am, I suggest you walk away while you still can." And for the first time since this whole thing started, she did, outside the courthouse. Dana handed me a copy of the dismissal and said, "That's not the last you'll hear from her." I nodded. I knew. Karen wasn't built for closure. She was built for conflict. And when one front closed, she'd find another. I returned home to find a letter from the HOA board in my mailbox. It was written in carefully neutral language, thanking me for my cooperation and commitment to community integrity. But the final paragraph made me pause. Effective immediately. Karen's role as HOA chairperson was suspended pending review. She was no longer authorized to file inspections or represent the board in any capacity. I stood on the porch rereading it, the edges of the letter flapping gently in the breeze. Diablo hopped onto the railing beside me and let out a low, triumphant cluck. The tide had turned. Over the next few days, something shifted in the neighborhood. People started waving again. A neighbor I barely knew brought over fresh peaches and said, "We saw the video. Just wanted to say thanks for standing up." An elderly couple stopped by to share how Karen had once stolen their garden hose and claimed it was community property. Another man said she yelled at his grandkids for riding scooters too close to her driveway. It wasn't just me. She'd been a shadow over this place for years. I just happened to be the first one she couldn't push. And then, a week later, I saw it. A small white for sale sign staked into Karen's pristine lawn. No big announcement, no farewell post on the community page, just the sign, leaning slightly to the right like it couldn't quite stand proud on her behalf. A moving truck came at dawn and left by sunset. And just like that, she was gone. But the story didn't end there. Stories like this never do. Because even when the villain leaves, the memory stays. Diablo became something of a local legend. Parents brought their kids to the fence line to see him. Someone made a meme, the Yoke Avenger. Another neighbor 3D printed a sheriff's badge for him. It sat proudly on the coop door next to a hand-painted sign, "Warning Guard Rooster on duty." And each time I looked at that sign, I thought back to everything Karen had tried to take. Not just eggs, not just space, but peace, ownership, dignity. And she lost. Not because I yelled, not because I fought dirty, but because I stood still. And because a rooster did what roosters do best, defend the nest. So if you're still watching, I want to ask you, what would you have done differently? Would you have kept quiet? Would you have let it go? Or would you have trained your own Diablo and waited patiently for the perfect moment to let the feathers fly the morning after Karen left? Something strange happened. The wind didn't carry tension. The neighborhood felt breathable. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee, waiting for the usual pit in my stomach to stir, but it didn't come. Diablo sat on the railing beside me, feathers ruffled slightly by the breeze, watching the empty driveway across the street like he was confirming a kill zone had been cleared. I half expected her car to reappear just to spite me, like a ghost rolling in to remind us she wasn't finished. But it never did. Her blinds were shut, her windows dark. A single flyer had already begun to curl on her porch, and the for sale sign leaned even harder to the right. Like gravity had finally had enough of her nonsense too. I thought that was the end, but I should have known better. Because people like Karen don't vanish. They regenerate in courtrooms, on forums, through whispers in the right ears. It didn't take long for the next wave to crash. 2 weeks after the moving truck disappeared, I received a call from Dana, my lawyer. Her tone was measured, but there was an edge to it, like she was trying to keep the irritation from boiling over. "You've been served," she said. "Civil complaint, filed through a proxy attorney in the next county. Karen's claiming psychological trauma and orchestrated defamation." I stood by the coupe when I got the call, watching Diablo peck contentedly at the gravel. "She's suing?" I asked. Dana paused. "She's attempting to." The official charge, intentional emotional distress it caused by the setup involving Diablo. The language read like fiction, that I had weaponized an animal for theatrical public humiliation and subjected a civilian to ridicule and digital abuse through premeditated entrapment. I almost laughed, but then I didn't, because this was no longer about fences or eggs. It was about legacy. Karen had lost control of the street, but she was trying to rewrite the ending. She wanted to be the one wronged, the victim, the woman with a neck brace, not a history of trespassing. So I did what I always did. I got to work. I pulled every frame of footage, every still photo, every recorded audio clip. I backed it all up 3 times and printed transcripts. I pulled HOA emails, meeting notes, anonymous testimonies. Neighbors had quietly messaged me after her departure. Everything from complaints about her threats to someone revealing she once tried to ban sunflower plants because they attracted insects with agendas. I met with Dana twice a week. We built a war chest of evidence so tight not even daylight could sneak through it. Meanwhile, the neighborhood continued healing. Kids returned to riding scooters along the sidewalks. Neighbors who once stayed silent started planting in front yards again. A soft hum of life returned, but beneath it all was a current, low and steady. Everyone knew this wasn't over, because the story wasn't just local anymore. One of the memes that had gone viral after the Rooster incident resurfaced, this time on a regional community page that covered bizarre neighborhood disputes. Then came a local news station. "Would you be willing to talk?" the reporter asked me on the phone. "Just about what happened. From your point of view." I told him I'd think about it. The last thing I wanted was to turn a rooster into a mascot for chaos. But then a message showed up in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just a folded sheet of paper. "You made this place livable again. Don't let her flip the script. We've got your back." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. That evening, I called the reporter back. "One condition," I said, "the story isn't about her. It's about a community recovering and a rooster doing his job." The segment aired 2 days later. A gentle, even-handed piece. Diablo got his moment, feathers shining, guarding the hens like royalty. I kept my answers short, clear. The footage spoke louder than anything I could say. The reporter closed the segment with a quote I hadn't expected. "Sometimes it only takes one person standing still to make everyone else realize they've been moving in the wrong direction." 3 days after the piece aired, Dana received a new letter from Karen's attorney, a motion to drop the suit. No explanation, no apology, just withdrawal. We both knew why. She'd lost the audience. The court of public opinion had shifted, and she hated that more than losing the actual case. That didn't mean she went away quietly. A neighbor told me she'd been seen in a cafe 2 towns over, ranting about conspiracies, about being set up by rooster extremists, whatever that meant. I didn't care. I didn't need revenge. I needed peace. And slowly, finally, I got it. Weeks passed. The coop settled into a perfect rhythm. The hens laid steadily. Diablo strutted like a retired general, watchful but content. One morning, I found a small envelope taped to the coop. Inside, a drawing, crayon on thick paper. It showed a rooster with a cape, standing heroically over a nest. At the bottom, "Thank you for keeping us safe. From Jude." The new neighbors, Kyle and Emily, had moved into Karen's old house with their daughter. They brought lemonade over their first week, said they'd heard about the incident but didn't want to ask too much. They just wanted to live quietly. Emily told me June was fascinated by the chickens. I told her Diablo didn't tolerate chaos, but if offered a carrot, he might grant her an audience. The next day, June came by the fence line with a small carrot in hand. She held it out, motionless. Diablo regarded her for a long moment. then pecked it once, gently. She grinned like she'd been knighted. From that day on, she visited every few mornings. Sometimes she brought notes. Sometimes she just sat and watched. I added a little sign beside the coop, "Meet the flock," and listed the hens' names along with a laminated portrait of Diablo mid-strut. Before long, more neighbors stopped by. Parents brought toddlers. Teenagers snapped photos for their social feeds. It wasn't chaos. It was connection, life, normalcy. One afternoon, Walter stopped by with something wrapped in a towel. He handed it to me without a word. Inside was a custom metal plaque. It read, "Honorary HOA Security Rooster, Diablo." I stared at it, then laughed. Walter didn't laugh, but he smiled. And that was enough. He nodded once and said, "Thanks for not quitting." I mounted the plaque beside the coop door. Just below the warning sign, Diablo pecked it once in approval. And then, one crisp autumn morning, something unexpected arrived. An envelope, tucked under a stone by the front gate. Inside was a note, handwritten in a familiar, sharp, slanted script. "I know I was wrong. I lost more than I meant to. Take care of your birds. They were never mine to take." No signature, no name, just ink and guilt. I stood there for a long time, reading it again and again. I didn't forgive her, not entirely, but I understood something in that moment. Not all battles end with victory. Some end with silence, a kind of exhausted, unspoken truth. I folded the note and placed it in the drawer beside the thank you card from June, not because I needed the memory, but because I didn't want to forget the lesson. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees. Diablo perched beside me. The sky glowed orange, and the only sound was the soft rustle of feathers and distant laughter from somewhere down the block. The war was over. Not with a gavel, not with shouting, but with stillness, with roots that held, with one rooster, one man, and a community that remembered how to breathe again. The first sign of the season turning wasn't the color of the leaves or the chill in the air. It was the sound, softer mornings, no arguments floating over the fence line, no passive-aggressive humming from the porch across the street, just quiet. The kind that seeps into your bones and makes you notice things you'd forgotten, like how the sun feels different on your skin in late autumn, or how Diablo's feathers catch the gold of sunrise in a way that looks almost ceremonial. With Karen gone and the dust settled, life returned to a rhythm I didn't realize I'd missed, but I also knew better than to assume that peace meant permanence. Peace in a neighborhood like ours isn't a destination, it's a temporary arrangement, held together by courtesy and the unspoken agreement not to push too far. The funny thing is, people didn't just start acting better, they started acting human. Little things. Neighbors left baked goods without notes. A woman I'd only spoken to once in passing brought over a bushel of apples from her tree. No explanation, just a quiet offering. Even the HOA board, once a distant, officious presence, seemed to loosen its collar. Walter sent a handwritten note thanking me for reestablishing the spirit of the block. It was short and formal, like everything he wrote. But the weight behind it was real. Diablo had become something of a local mascot. Someone started a small blog about neighborhood guardians and listed him as #1. People took photos from the street, kids waved. Someone built a tiny wooden podium and placed it outside the coop with a sign that read, "Weekly announcements by Sir Diablo, Defender of the Nest." I left it there. Every now and then I'd scribble something like, "Egg count up, morale strong, proceed with snacks." It became a thing. Then came the new family, the Harpers. They moved into the old corner house that had been vacant since spring. A couple in their 30s, 2 boys under 10, and a dog named Waffles. I met them one afternoon when their youngest son threw a frisbee that landed near my garden beds. He sprinted over, stopped when he saw the coop, and whispered, "Is that him? The rooster from the internet?" I nodded. "That's Diablo. Be respectful, and he won't judge you." The boy blinked. "Do I need to bow?" I shrugged. "Wouldn't hurt." The kid bowed. Diablo let out a single approving cluck, and from that moment on, the Harpers became part of the unspoken fold of people who understood the rules of this land: respect the space, honor the quiet, feed the chickens only with permission. As winter edged closer, I made improvements, insulated the coop better, replaced the heat lamp with a more efficient one, built a low wooden bench near the fence so kids could sit and watch the flock without getting too close. It was peaceful. But peace, I'd learned, had layers, and it didn't erase what had happened. One morning, while refilling the feed, I found a bundle of white feathers tangled in the wire along the south fence. Not enough to signal danger, just enough to make me pause. The pattern didn't look like a predator attack, more like someone had tried to reach through the fencing and startled one of the hens. I checked the perimeter. No breach, no prints, just a faint impression in the gravel near the compost bin, small, narrow, deliberate. It could have been a coincidence, could have been a raccoon, could have been wind. But the thing about instinct is that once you trust it, you can't pretend not to hear it. That afternoon, I reviewed the camera footage, nothing obvious, but around 3:17 a.m., one of the night cameras glitched just for 2 seconds, a flicker, a motion blur. Enough to suggest someone passed through the edge of the frame without triggering a full alert. I adjusted the angle, recalibrated the sensitivity, buried chicken wire deeper under the fence line. I didn't sound the alarm, didn't call the sheriff, but I paid attention because if there was one thing Karen had taught me, it was that silence doesn't always mean retreat. Sometimes it means reset. The following week, Diablo began acting strange, not aggressive, restless. He paced more, crowed at odd times, perched higher on the coop's edge, as if scanning the horizon for something familiar and unwanted. The hens, too, were jumpier. Their laying patterns shifted, erratic for a few days before stabilizing. I chalked it up to temperature swings until one morning. Found a small zip tie on the ground near the coop gate. New, bright red. I don't keep zip ties near the coop, and no kid in the neighborhood would have any reason to leave one there. It was a sign, not loud, not direct, but intentional. A fingerprint without the print, a whisper in the dirt. I stored it in a jar on my workbench and doubled the locks. The next night, I sat up in the barn with a thermos of coffee and a pair of binoculars, just in case. Nothing happened, nothing at all, and somehow that was worse. Then came the envelope, folded neatly, placed under a smooth rock near the edge of my porch. No return address, no stamps. Inside was a single line: "You can't keep everyone out forever." No signature. But the handwriting was familiar, too familiar. I compared it to the apology note Karen had left months ago. The slant, the pressure, the sharp tail of the Y. It matched. She was still watching. From where? I didn't know, but she hadn't let go. Not really. The lawsuit had failed. The neighbors had turned. The HOA had revoked her seat. But to her, the story hadn't ended. And that's when I realized the mistake I'd made. I thought the silence meant she was gone, but it only meant she'd changed shape. I met with Dana again. She advised installing motion-activated perimeter lights beyond the coop zone and setting up a separate cloud backup for footage. I followed her advice. I also added a new feature to the co-op, an internal trigger connected to a loud external speaker. If someone stepped inside during restricted hours, Diablo's crow would be amplified tenfold. Not for violence, for exposure. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted visibility. And it worked. 2 nights later, at 4:03 the speaker blared across the field. I ran out with my flashlight. Boots barely tied. Found the gate ajar, straw disturbed, but nothing taken. No figures in the yard, just the aftermath of someone startled into running. I reviewed the footage. The figure was blurry hooded. But again, the posture, the gait, the way she ducked her head when the speaker went off, it matched. She hadn't given up. She'd just grown quieter, more careful. But now she knew something else. I was still ready, still watching, still defending, not with malice, with purpose. The next morning, I found a single egg placed outside the coop door. Not stolen, not smashed, just there, like an offering or a dare. I picked it up, held it in my hand, and considered the weight. Then I turned to Diablo, who stood at the threshold, watching me with that sharp, knowing gaze. I nodded. "We're not done yet, are we, buddy?" He didn't answer. of course. But he didn't have to, because some battles don't end with winners. They end with guardians, with watchers, with the quiet understanding that vigilance is not paranoia. It's memory. It's the price of having something worth protecting. And so the days rolled on. Kids kept coming to the Meet the Flock bench. June brought a small, painted rock with Diablo's face on it and placed it next to the sign. People brought cracked corn, leftover greens, handwritten notes. No one mentioned Karen. But every time someone said, "Thank you for making the block feel safe again," I knew who they were really talking about. Not me, not entirely, but the rooster who had chased a lie out of the shadows and stood firm at the line. So if you're still with me, still listening, I'll ask you this. When peace returns to your world, do you let it lull you into forgetting? Or do you sharpen your senses? Just enough to remember that even the silence can carry echoes of what came before. Because in this little patch of dirt, watched over by feathers and fire, we never really forgot. We just got better at paying attention.